They didn't strike her, didn't throw her down. They didn't have to. They cut open her uniform shirt slowly, deliberately with a training knife. Not to wound, to humiliate. 3 men, one corridor, no witnesses. 3 men standing too close. One woman being treated like entertainment. In silence they mistook for submission. They called it correction. They called it form adjustment. But what it really was, sexual harassment in uniform. What they didn't know was that the woman they were cornering was a Navy SEAL, a Tier 1 operator. And by the time that knife hit the ground, all 3 were flat on their backs, disarmed, disoriented, done. But before we show you exactly what she did next, and the silent move that made the entire base fall quiet, you need to understand how she got there. Because this story doesn't start in a corridor. It starts 2 weeks earlier in a Pentagon office with a man who'd spent 41 years learning that the worst battles aren't always fought overseas. The office was small, Pentagon basement level, no windows, fluorescent lights, humming like anxious wasps. The kind of room where careers came to die quietly, where paperwork absorbed dreams. Colonel Garrett Whitmore sat behind a desk that had seen better decades, his hands flat against worn manila folders, his jaw tight with the kind of anger that came from knowing the truth and being unable to prove it. 67 years old, silver hair cropped military short, eyes the color of winter steel, sharp enough to cut through excuses and lies with equal efficiency. They called him Stone, not because he was hard, though he was, but because he was immovable. Once Garrett Whitmore set his feet, God himself couldn't budge him. The folders spread before him told a story he'd seen too many times. 7 formal complaints. 18 months. 4 female Marines transferred out to different bases, careers derailed, dreams abandoned. 3 complaints withdrawn after what the paperwork called peer counseling sessions. A bureaucratic phrase that meant intimidation. Isolation pressure, applied until silence seemed safer than speaking. All of it signed off by the same man. Major Silas Hargrave, executive officer at the Joint Warfare Conditioning Facility in California. A man Stone had served with briefly in Somalia in 1993, Black Hawk Down. When bullets flew and chaos reigned, Hargrave had been solid, dependable. But somewhere between Mogadishu and now something had twisted inside him. Or maybe it had always been there, just waiting for the right environment to metastasize. Stone's phone buzzed. Encrypted line. He answered without preamble. Vance. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, the kind of voice that could talk you through defusing a bomb or inform you of your own death with equal composure. Colonel, you rang. I need you in California. Anonymous evaluation. Joint facility. Marine and Navy cross-branch integration assessment. A pause, then, what am I really evaluating? Stone smiled despite himself. This was why he'd called her. Commander Ilara Vance didn't waste time pretending the world was cleaner than it was. Predators, he said simply. 3 Marines, pattern behavior. I need to know if they're still hunting. And if they are, then I need proof that will stand up to SOCOM scrutiny, the kind of proof that doesn't get buried under he said, she said in peer counseling sessions. Another pause. Longer this time. When Ilara spoke again, her voice carried a weight Stone recognized. The weight of someone who'd been powerless once and swore never to be again. I'm assuming you want me to be the bait. I want you to be what you are, and when they bite, I want you to show them what a Tier 1 operator looks like. Rules of engagement. Stone leaned back in his chair. It creaked. Everything in this office creaked, as if the building itself was tired of holding secrets. Observe until they cross the line. Document everything. And when they do cross it, because they will, you handle it your way. Just make sure there are enough witnesses that nobody can call it a misunderstanding. Copy that. When do I ship? 48 hours. I'll have your cover credentials ready. You'll go in as an anonymous integration officer. No rank visible, just a numbered armband. Low profile. Stone. Her voice shifted softer but no less certain. What's the real story here? He looked down at the folders. At Staff Sergeant Bryn Caldwell's file. 28 years old. Exemplary service record. Forced medical discharge after 18 months of documented harassment that command had labeled as interpersonal friction and adaptation challenges. She'd filed a formal complaint, It had been routed to Hargrave. 3 weeks later, she'd withdrawn it. 4 weeks after that, she was gone. Stone had tried to reach her. 3 calls, 2 emails, she wouldn't respond, and he understood why. Because speaking up hadn't saved her. It had ended her. The real story, Stone said quietly, is that I failed someone. A good Marine. She trusted the system. The system failed her. And the man who failed her is still in position to fail others. Then we don't fail this time. No, we don't. He ended the call, sat in silence for a moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a photograph. Grenada, 1985. He was 27, then lean and hungry, standing with his squad outside a compound they'd just cleared. The fight had been brutal. Close quarters. Knife work. The kind of combat where hesitation meant death. He'd learned something in those Grenada tunnels that most men never understood. That real strength wasn't about who could shout loudest or hit hardest. It was about who could stay calm when chaos erupted. Who could move with precision when everyone else was flailing? Who could wait for the exact right moment and then strike with absolute certainty? He tried to teach that lesson for 41 years. To hundreds of Marines, thousands of recruits. Most learned it, some didn't. And a dangerous few, learned it and twisted it into something ugly. They learned patience not for honor but for predation. They learned precision not for protection but for targeting the vulnerable. Men like Corporal Brennan Cade, like Lance Corporal Wyatt Mercer, like Private First Class Dylan Thorne. Stone put the photograph away, locked the drawer. Then he made one more call to Admiral Corbin Ashford, commander of the California facility. Corbin, it's Stone. I'm sending you an evaluation officer. She'll be there Monday. Anonymous integration assessment. Whitmore, what's this really about? It's about making sure the Marines under your command know the difference between discipline and predation. Ashford's voice tightened. If you're implying, I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you, you have a problem. I'm sending someone who can identify it. After that, what you do with the information is your call. But if you ignore it and something happens, SOCOM won't be calling me. They'll be calling you. Silence on the other end, then understood. Stone ended the call, leaned back, closed his eyes. 41 years, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm, Somalia, Fallujah, Afghanistan. He'd seen combat in 7 countries, trained personnel in twice that many, earned more citations than he could remember, and carried more scars than showed on any medical file. But this felt different, because this wasn't about enemy combatants or foreign threats. This was about the rot that grew from within, the kind that festered in silence and spread through willful ignorance, the kind that destroyed good people while everyone looked away and called it interpersonal friction. He thought about Alara Vance. He'd trained her 12 years ago, 2012, when the SEAL program finally opened to women who could meet the standard. Not a lowered standard, not an adjusted standard, the same standard that had been breaking men for decades. Alara had met it, exceeded it, and she'd done it while enduring harassment from instructors who believed women had no place in special warfare. She'd ignored the comments, outlasted the skeptics. And when she graduated, she hadn't gloated or preached. She'd simply done the job, mission after mission, evaluation after evaluation, until her record spoke louder than any argument ever could. Now she was Tier 1, the highest operational clearance, the kind of assignment that meant when SOCOM needed something done quietly and perfectly, they called you. Stone had taught her the technical skills, the weapons handling, the close quarters combat, the tactical thinking. But what made Alara exceptional wasn't what he'd taught her. It was what she'd brought with her. The patience, the focus, the absolute refusal to mistake silence for weakness. He remembered something he'd told her during a training exercise. Fallujah room clearing simulation. She'd rushed a door, taken simulated, fire failed the scenario. Afterwards, sitting in the debriefing room, he'd said, "The fighter who moves first commits. The fighter who moves second controls. In Fallujah, we learned to let them come to us. Let them expose their position. Let them believe they had the advantage. And then we struck from an angle they never saw coming." Patience isn't weakness, Vance. Patience is the weapon that defeats arrogance. She'd internalized that lesson, made it part of her operational doctrine. And now she was going to use it against men who'd mistaken her silence for submission, who'd thought that cutting a woman's uniform with a training knife was correction rather than assault, who'd built their predation on the assumption that no one would ever make them answer for it. They were about to learn differently. Stone stood, straightened his uniform, locked the folders in his safe. Then he walked out of that basement office and into the Pentagon corridor where the fluorescent lights hummed and careers died quietly and truth got buried under paperwork. But not this time. This time the truth was coming, and it wore the face of a woman they'd underestimated, a Navy SEAL who'd learned from the best, who'd spent 12 years proving she belonged, who'd earned every inch of respect through competence and grit and absolute refusal to quit. This time the predators had cornered the wrong woman. And by the time they realized their mistake, it would be too late to do anything except hit the ground and wonder how three men ended up flat on their backs in under 3 seconds. Stone smiled as he walked, a cold, satisfied smile, because 41 years of service had taught him many things. But the most important lesson was this: justice delayed isn't justice denied. Sometimes justice just needs the right operator to deliver it. And Commander Ilara Vance, she was exactly the right operator. 2 days later, California, Joint Warfare Conditioning Facility, 20 miles inland from the coast, where the desert heat pressed against everything like an interrogator waiting for someone to break. The kind of heat that made uniforms cling and tempers fray and discipline slip just enough for true character to show through the cracks. The base sprawled across 600 acres. Training yards, obstacle courses, combat simulation buildings, barracks arranged in precise rows. Everything regulation, everything squared away. On the surface, it looked like discipline, order, the backbone of military excellence. But Commander Ilara Vance knew better, because she'd spent 12 years learning to look beneath surfaces, to read the spaces between words, to recognize the patterns that revealed truth when everyone was trying to hide it. She arrived at 0600 hours. No fanfare, no welcome committee, just a Humvee that dropped her at the admin building and drove away without comment. She wore standard fatigues, no rank insignia, no name tape, just a numbered armband 177 clipped above her left elbow. Anonymous integration officer, another face in the crowd, exactly as planned. Inside the admin building, a staff sergeant barely looked up from his terminal as he processed her paperwork, handed her a facility map, pointed toward the barracks. You're assigned to mixed unit training rotation, 0700 formation, equipment bay for gear issue. Any questions? No. He looked at her then, really looked, taking in the buzzed hair, the scar tissue along her knuckles, the way she stood with weight balanced, ready to move in any direction without telegraphing intent. His expression shifted slightly, recognition without understanding, the sense that she was something other than what she appeared. But he said nothing, just stamped her papers and waved her through. Ilara walked across the yard, morning light breaking over the eastern fence line, boots striking packed earth in rhythm with 100 others. The base was waking up, coming alive with the controlled chaos of training rotations, voices barking cadence, the metallic clatter of weapons being prepped, the smell of sweat and dust and diesel exhaust. She'd been in places like this 100 times. Afghanistan, Iraq, training facilities across 3 continents. But this was different, because this time she wasn't here to train. She was here to hunt, and the prey wore the same uniform she did. The barracks were standard: triple bunks, metal lockers, concrete floors. She found her assigned rack middle bunk back corner and stowed her gear. Minimal: a duffel bag, change of uniforms, toiletries. Nothing that suggested anything beyond another faceless integration officer doing time until rotation ended. But in the bottom of that duffel, wrapped in a towel, was her real gear: encrypted sat phone, micro recorder, digital camera with telephoto lens, and a black ID wallet she wouldn't need until the exact right moment. 0700 formation came fast. Mixed unit, 60 Marines and sailors rotating through cross-branch training. The goal: integration, learning to fight alongside different service branches, breaking down silos, building operational cohesion. The reality: friction, competition, men trying to prove their branch was superior. women trying to prove they belonged at all, and instructors who sometimes forgot that integration meant cooperation, not domination. Ilara fell in with the formation, middle of the pack, not front where leaders stood, not back where stragglers hid, just another body in the crowd. Unremarkable, forgettable. That's when she saw them. Three Marines, moving together, not officially paired, but orbiting each other with the casual coordination of men who'd hunted as a pack before. Corporal Brennan Cade, 27, dark hair buzzed to stubble, jaw like a cinder block, eyes that tracked movement with predatory focus, not looking at people, assessing them, categorizing, target or threat, weak or strong, worth engaging or worth dismissing. Lance Corporal Wyatt Mercer, 25, broad-shouldered, the kind of mass that came from years in the weight room and a metabolism that burned everything into muscle. He moved with deliberate heaviness, not clumsy, but like a man who knew his size was weapon enough and didn't need finesse. Private First Class Dylan Thorne, 24, wiry, sharp-eyed, the calculating one. Where Cade was direct and Mercer was physical, Thorne was tactical. He hung back, observed, waited for openings. The kind of fighter who struck from angles you didn't see coming. Together they were dangerous. Not because of individual skill, though they had that, but because they'd learned to coordinate, to hunt as a unit. And right now they were scanning the formation, looking for opportunity. Their eyes passed over Ilara, dismissed her, moved on. She kept her expression neutral. But inside, something cold and certain settled into place. Because that dismissal told her everything she needed to know. They didn't see her as a threat. They saw her as prey. Perfect. The morning began with PT, high-intensity interval training, sprints, burpees, rope climbs, sandbag carries, the kind of workout designed to break people down before building them back up. Ilara kept pace with the middle of the pack, not struggling, not excelling, just competent enough to avoid notice. She watched Cade Mercer and Thorne. They excelled, pushed hard, made sure instructors saw their performance. But between sets, when instructors weren't watching, their attention drifted to the women in formation, assessing, categorizing. Private First Class Ainsley Vaughn, 22, blonde hair pulled back in regulation bun, Oklahoma accent that came through even when she was gasping for air. She struggled with the rope climb, fell twice, got back up both times. Determination etched across her face. Cade watched her fall, smiled. Not encouragement, amusement. After PT came weapons drills, M4 carbine disassembly and reassembly, blindfolded, timed, standard USMC qualification. Ilara took her position at the weapons table, M4 laid out before her, components arranged in precise order. She'd done this thousands of times, could do it in her sleep, in combat, in pitch darkness with incoming fire. But today she made herself slower, fumbled slightly with the bolt carrier group. Took 45 seconds when she could have done it in 20. Adequate, forgettable. 3 tables over, Thorne finished in 22 seconds. Called out his time, made sure everyone heard. Ilara glanced his way, caught his eyes on her. Not her weapon, her. The way a hunter watches wounded prey. She looked away, let her shoulders curve slightly inward. A subtle body language shift that signaled uncertainty, vulnerability. Thorne's smile widened. By midday, the pattern was established. Ilara performed adequately but not exceptionally, made small mistakes, asked occasional questions, positioned herself as competent but not threatening, just another integration officer trying to keep up with elite Marines. And Cade Mercer and Thorne noticed, started positioning themselves near her during drills. Not obviously, just gravitational pull, orbiting closer, testing proximity. During the lunch break, Ilara sat alone at a corner table in the chow hall, ate quickly, kept her head down. The universal signal of someone who didn't want attention. Cade walked past her table, deliberately bumped it with his hip. Not hard, just enough to rattle her tray. He kept walking, didn't look back, didn't apologize. Ilara said nothing, but her hand tightened slightly on her fork, just for a second, then relaxed. Across the hall, Staff Sergeant Bryn Caldwell's face appeared in her mind. The file photo Stone had shown her. 28 years old, service record that spoke of dedication and competence, and eyes that carried the hollow weight of someone who'd learned that speaking truth sometimes costs more than staying silent. Alara set her fork down, finished her meal, stood, bussed her tray, and as she walked past Cade's table, she heard him mutter something to Mercer. Didn't catch the words, didn't need to. The tone said enough. The afternoon brought combatives training, MC MAP Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, Level 3 techniques, grappling, joint manipulation, weapon retention, the kind of close-quarters combat where skill mattered more than strength and positioning trumped size. Alara was paired with Mercer. He outweighed her by 80 pounds, stood 4 inches taller, and when the instructor called engage, he came at her with confidence bordering on arrogance. She let him take her down, not dramatically, just allowed his weight advantage to work, ended up on her back with him in mount position. He applied pressure, not enough to hurt, just enough to dominate, to prove a point. The instructor called stop. Mercer stood, extended a hand to help her up. Alara stood without taking it. A subtle thing, but Mercer noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly. You okay? He asked, false concern, the kind of question that wasn't really a question. Fine, Alara said. Neutral tone, no challenge, no submission, just acknowledgement. They reset. Went again. This time Alara defended better, not winning, just making him work for it, showing enough skill that he couldn't dismiss her entirely, but not so much that he'd recognize danger. After the third round, Mercer was breathing hard. Alara's breathing remained steady. He noticed that too, and something shifted in his expression. Confusion. The first crack in certainty. The day wore on, drill after drill, exercise after exercise. And through it all, Cade Mercer and Thorne kept circling closer, testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing how far they could go before she reacted. Alara gave them nothing. No anger, no fear, just neutral competence and carefully calibrated vulnerability. Because Stone had taught her something fundamental during her SEAL training. Predators don't hunt what scares them, he'd said during a night exercise. They hunt what looks like prey. So if you want to catch a predator, you have to make them believe they're hunting you. You have to let them commit. And then when they're fully exposed, when they've crossed the line and can't retreat, that's when you show them what you really are. By 1800 hours, Alara was exactly where she needed to be. Established as a presence, noticed but not remarkable, vulnerable but not helpless. The perfect target for men who'd learned that institutional protection meant they could hunt without consequence. She returned to barracks, showered, changed into fresh fatigues, then walked to the equipment bay on the eastern edge of the facility. The building was older, cinder block walls, narrow corridors, blind corners where observation was limited and opportunities for isolation abundant. She walked through slowly, memorizing layout, exits, sight lines, camera positions, everything she'd need to know when the moment came. Because it would come, maybe tomorrow, maybe 3 days from now. But it would come. Men like Cade Mercer and Thorne always escalated, always pushed boundaries until something stopped them. And so far, nothing had. That was about to change. Alara returned to barracks, lay in her bunk, stared at the ceiling, thought about Bryn Caldwell, about the 7 formal complaints, about the pattern of predation that had been allowed to continue because documentation wasn't enough and victims weren't believed and the system protected the predators instead of the prey. She thought about her own history, 19 years old, fresh recruit, a senior instructor who'd cornered her in an equipment room, tried to touch her. When she'd reported it, she'd been told she'd misunderstood his intent, that she was too sensitive for military service, that maybe she should consider a different career path. She'd stayed, endured, fought her way through, proved herself 100 times over, and eventually earned a place where no one questioned whether she belonged. But the memory never left. The powerlessness, the rage, the institutional betrayal of being told your truth didn't matter. That memory had driven her, shaped her, made her into someone who would never be powerless again, and who would never let others remain powerless if she could prevent it. Tomorrow she'd continue the operation, continue being prey. Continue letting Cade Mercer and Thorne believe they were in control. But when they finally crossed the line and they would, Alara Vance would show them something they'd never seen before. A Navy SEAL who'd spent 12 years learning exactly how to dismantle predators. 3 seconds. That's all it would take. 3 seconds to go from prey to predator, from victim to operator, from powerless to unstoppable. And when those 3 seconds were over, when Cade Mercer and Thorne were on the ground wondering what the hell just happened, Ilara would produce that black ID wallet, and the entire base would learn what Tier 1 really meant. She closed her eyes. Sleep came easily, because she knew something the predators didn't. Something Stone had taught her in Grenada stories and Fallujah lessons and Desert Storm wisdom accumulated over 41 years of service. Real warriors didn't hunt the weak. They protected them. And when predators emerged wearing the uniform, real warriors eliminated them. Not with rage, not with emotion, but with precision, skill, and the absolute certainty that justice, when delivered correctly, didn't need to announce itself. It just struck, swift, silent, certain, and in 4 days, that's exactly what would happen. The corridor was waiting, the knife was waiting, the moment was waiting, and Commander Alara Vance, she was ready. The knife clattered to the floor. Then came the ID wallet, and when they read what was inside, the entire base stopped breathing. But before that moment arrived, before Corporal Brennan Cade hit the concrete with the wind knocked out of his lungs, before Lance Corporal Wyatt Mercer discovered what a hyperextended shoulder felt like, before Private First Class Dylan Thorne understood the difference between intimidation and actual combat capability, there were 3 more days. 3 days of escalation. 3 days of boundaries being tested and lines being crossed. 3 days of Alara Vance becoming exactly what predators look for: isolated, vulnerable prey. Day 2 began with dawn breaking over California desert like a threat. Heat already pressing against the morning air. The kind of heat that made tempers short and judgment poor. Perfect conditions for men who'd learned to operate in the spaces where discipline grew lax. The formation assembled at 0630, earlier than standard, a surprise PT test, the kind of evaluation designed to catch people unprepared, to see who maintained standards even when caught off guard. Alara fell in with the others, noted immediately that Cade Mercer and Thorne had positioned themselves in the row directly behind her, close enough that she could feel their presence, close enough that every movement they made registered in her peripheral awareness. The test began. 3-mile run, full combat load, 45 pounds of gear, desert heat already climbing toward 90 degrees. The kind of run that separated committed from casual. That revealed who maintained their conditioning and who'd let it slip. Alara kept pace with the middle of the pack, not leading, not struggling, just maintaining. Her breathing steady, her stride economical, conserving energy the way Stone had taught her during their first desert training exercise. Heat is a weapon, he'd said, standing in a 110-degree Arizona sun without breaking a sweat. Use it against opponents who haven't learned to respect it. Let them burn themselves out while you stay controlled. Then strike when they're depleted. Behind her, she heard Mercer's heavy breathing. Not struggling, but working harder than necessary. Pushing to maintain position near her, rather than running his own race. Tactical error. Letting target selection override operational efficiency. They were committed now. Fully engaged, which meant the timeline was accelerating. The run ended. Alara finished in the middle third, adequate, unmemorable. She took water, rehydrated properly, watched as Cade approached Private Ainsley Vaughn, who'd finished near the back of the pack. Struggling today, Private, Cade's voice carried false concern, the kind of question designed to humiliate while sounding helpful. Ainsley's face flushed. No, Corporal, just not maintaining standards. Cade stepped closer, invaded her space. That's a problem. Standards keep people alive. When you can't maintain them, you put everyone at risk. Ainsley said nothing, but her hands clenched at her sides. And Alara saw something in her eyes that confirmed what Stone's files had suggested. This wasn't the first time Cade had targeted her. This was a pattern, established, ongoing. Alara filed that observation, added it to the growing tactical picture, then turned away as if uninterested, as if she hadn't noticed. as if she wasn't cataloging every interaction for the moment when documentation would matter. The morning continued with weapons qualifications, M4 carbine, moving targets, stress fire exercises, the kind of shooting that required focus under pressure. Alara took her position on the line, loaded her magazine, 28 rounds, standard combat load. The weapon felt familiar in her hands. Extension of intention, tool calibrated to purpose. The targets appeared, pop-up silhouettes at varying distances. She engaged, controlled pairs, center mass, rhythm matching heartbeat, breathing synchronized with trigger press. She scored 41 out of 50, qualified expert by Marine standards, but not exceptional, not memorable. Several shooters scored higher, including Thorne, who made sure everyone knew his 47. But what Thorne didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Alara had deliberately missed 9 shots, grouped them in a pattern that looked like wind drift and stress rather than intentional placement. Because exceptional shooting would have raised questions, would have made her remarkable, would have broken her cover as just another integration officer, and she needed them to keep underestimating her for 48 more hours. By midday, the harassment had escalated, subtle still, deniable, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. During hand-to-hand combat drills, Mercer was again paired with Alara. This time his techniques were rougher, pressure applied longer than necessary, positions held beyond the instructor's call to break, not enough to cause injury, just enough to establish dominance. When they reset for the third round, Mercer leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "You're tougher than you look." I like that. The words weren't compliment. They were assessment. Predator confirming prey characteristics before committing to the hunt. Alara said nothing, just reset her stance. Let the drill continue. But she cataloged the comment, time-stamped it, added it to the pattern of escalation that would matter when she needed to justify what came next. Lunch came and went. Alara ate alone again. Cade walked past her table again. This time he didn't just bump it. He stopped, looked down at her meal. "That all you're eating?" False concern again. "Need to maintain your strength out here. Never know when you'll need it." The threat was implicit, wrapped in words that could be defended as helpful. But the tone carried weight. Suggestion. Promise. Alara met his eyes, held them for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to show she'd heard, not long enough to be challenging. Then looked back down at her food. Cade smiled, walked away. But as he passed, his hand brushed her shoulder. Brief contact. Casual. Deniable. But Alara felt it for what it was. Territory being marked. Boundaries being tested. The predator announcing his intention before the strike. 40 hours left. The afternoon brought tactical movement exercises. Squad-based. Moving through simulated urban terrain. Learning to coordinate across service branches. Building the integration that justified this entire facility's existence. Alara was assigned to a mixed squad. 6 Marines, 4 sailors. She positioned herself in the middle of the formation. Not point, not rear security, just another body in the tactical movement. Thorne ended up next to her. Close. Closer than tactical spacing required. When they moved through a narrow corridor in the kill house, his body pressed against hers. Not accidental, deliberate. "Tight quarters," he muttered. "Gotta get comfortable being close to your teammates." His hand brushed her hip, then her lower back. Brief contacts that could be explained as navigational adjustment, but weren't. Alara kept moving, didn't react, but she marked the escalation, verbal to physical, testing to touching. They were accelerating faster than she'd projected, which meant the timeline might compress. She adjusted her operational planning accordingly. That evening, instead of returning directly to barracks, Alara walked the facility perimeter. Familiarizing herself with layout, memorizing routes, identifying choke points, everything she'd need when documentation phase transitioned to intervention phase. She passed the equipment bay. The building where Bryn Caldwell had been cornered 18 months ago, where the pattern had been established, where men had learned they could operate with impunity as long as they avoided cameras and witnesses. Alara studied the approaches, the blind corridor on the eastern side, the storage area with limited visibility. The perfect trap for predators who'd learned to avoid observation. Tomorrow or the next day, she'd engineer a situation, create opportunity, make herself available in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. And when they took that opportunity, when they crossed from harassment to assault, she'd document it, then dismantle it, then ensure it never happened again. But tonight she was still prey, still vulnerable, still letting them believe they controlled this hunt. She returned to barracks, lay in her bunk, closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come immediately because her mind was running through scenarios, calculating probabilities, wargaming responses. Three opponents, coordinated, operating on their ground, with institutional protection and established patterns. Under normal circumstances, that would be overwhelming odds. But these weren't normal circumstances because they didn't know they were fighting. They thought they were hunting, thought their target was isolated and vulnerable and powerless. They were wrong on all three counts. Ilara finally slept, deep, dreamless, the sleep of someone who knew exactly what was coming and had prepared for every variation. Day 3 dawned hotter, the kind of heat that made everything harder, that eroded patience and judgment, that created the conditions where men who'd been circling finally decided to strike. Morning PT was brutal. High-intensity circuits, burpees, mountain climbers, rope climbs, sandbag carries, the kind of workout designed to break people down. Cade positioned himself next to Ilara during the rope climb, watched as she ascended, his eyes tracking her movement with predatory focus. When she descended, he was waiting at the bottom. "Good form," he said, then added, "for someone your size." The qualifier was deliberate, reminder of physical disparity, establishment of hierarchy. Ilara nodded, said nothing, moved to the next station, but she noted the shift. Yesterday had been testing. Today was decision. They'd moved from assessment to commitment, which meant the window was closing. The strike would come soon. Maybe today. Probably tomorrow. She needed to control the terrain. During the mid-morning break, Ilara made her first deliberate move. She approached the equipment bay, alone, visibly alone, walking with purpose but no apparent awareness of vulnerability. Inside the bay, she browsed through gear, checking inventory, examining equipment, playing the role of integration officer doing her job. She felt them before she saw them. Olin, Mercer, Thorne, entering the bay separately but converging. Not surrounding her yet, just positioning, creating opportunity. Ilara's heart rate didn't change. Her breathing remained steady. She continued examining equipment, letting them commit, letting them believe this was happenstance rather than engineering. They moved closer, started a conversation among themselves. Loud enough for her to hear, talking about the morning's PT, about weakness, about standards, about people who couldn't maintain them. The words were aimed at her without being directed to her. Psychological pressure, establishing dominance through proximity and implication. Ilara finished her inventory check, turned to leave, found her path partially blocked. Not completely, just enough to make her navigate around them, to force close contact. She moved, chose her angle carefully, and as she passed, Mercer's shoulder bumped hers. Harder than necessary, physical escalation disguised as crowded navigation. "Careful," he said, false apology, tight spaces. Ilara said nothing, just kept walking, left the equipment bay, returned to the training yard. But she'd accomplished her objective, established pattern, created opportunity. Now they knew she went to the equipment bay alone, knew she was accessible, knew she was vulnerable. Tomorrow she'd do it again, and tomorrow they'd be ready. They'd corner her properly, in the blind corridor, where no cameras reached, where no witnesses would see. And then she'd show them what Tier 1 meant. The afternoon brought more tactical exercises, movement under fire, stress inoculation, learning to function when chaos erupted and precision became survival. During one exercise, Thorne ended up behind Ilara in a stacked entry formation, his hands on her hips, ostensibly for tactical communication, actually for dominance, for continued boundary violation. "Stay tight," he muttered. "Follow my lead." His grip tightened, fingers digging in, pressure applied, message sent. Ilara didn't pull away, didn't protest, just accepted the contact. because protest would have been resistance, and resistance would have been acknowledgement. And acknowledgement would have validated their behavior as meaningful rather than pathetic. She waited until the exercise completed, then stepped away, casual, unremarkable, as if the contact hadn't registered. But it had. She documented it mentally. Time, location, witnesses, everything she'd need when the formal report was filed. After intervention. After they were on the ground wondering what the hell just happened. That evening, Alara made contact with Stone. Encrypted sat phone, short conversation, update only. Timeline accelerating, she said. Estimate 24 to 36 hours before they commit fully. Are you positioned? Stone's voice carried weight. Concern without doubt. Trust earned over 12 years. Equipment Bay, Eastern Corridor. Tomorrow around 1400 hours. I'll engineer isolation. Witnesses. I'll ensure response time allows for observation before intervention. Silence. Then Alara, be certain. Once you move, there's no walking it back. I'm certain. They've crossed every line except the final one. Tomorrow they will. And when they do, I'll document it. Then end it. Copy. I'll brief Admiral Ashford. He'll have MPs staged but not visible. You will have response within 60 seconds. I won't need 60. I'll need 15. 60 is for cleanup. She heard Stone smile through the encrypted line. That's my student. The call ended. Alara secured the phone, lay back in her bunk, ran through the scenarios one more time. 3 opponents, coordinated but not trained in actual combat, confident but not competent, predators but not warriors, against a Tier 1 SEAL operator who'd spent 12 years learning exactly how to dismantle opponents efficiently and without wasted motion, who'd been trained by a man who'd survived Grenada tunnels and Desert Storm chaos and Somalia streets and Fallujah firefights, who'd internalized lessons paid for in blood across 41 years of service. The fight wouldn't be fair. But fairness wasn't the objective. Justice was. And justice delivered properly was swift and surgical and absolutely final. Tomorrow would bring that justice. Tomorrow would balance the scales that had been tipped in favor of predators for too long. Tomorrow would teach 3 men that uniform didn't grant immunity and institutional protection eventually met individual accountability. Tomorrow, Alara Vance would stop being prey and remind everyone what real operators look like. But tonight she slept, because tomorrow required clarity, focus, the kind of precision that only came from being fully rested and absolutely certain. And Alara was certain, had been certain since Stone first briefed her, had been certain since she read Bryn Caldwell's file, had been certain since she felt Mercer's hands on her hips and Thorne's breath on her neck and Cade's eyes tracking her like wounded game. Certain that predators, when properly confronted, weren't actually dangerous. They were just cowards who'd learned to operate in the absence of accountability. Tomorrow accountability arrived. Wearing fatigues and numbered armband 157 and 12 years of SEAL training and 41 years of institutional wisdom passed down from a man who understood that real warriors protected rather than prayed. Tomorrow the knife would cut her shirt, and then the knife would hit the floor. And then 3 predators would learn what happened when prey turned out to be predator. When silence turned out to be strategy, when patience turned out to be weapon. Tomorrow would be 3 seconds long, but those 3 seconds would reshape everything that came after. Alara closed her eyes. Her last thought before sleep was Stone's voice during her graduation from SEAL training, standing in California sun with her trident in his hand saying words that had become her operational doctrine. You've earned this not because I trained you, but because you refused to quit when quitting was easier. You've proven you belong not by demanding it, but by demonstrating it. And now you carry a responsibility to honor this trident, to protect those who can't protect themselves, to be the warrior this nation needs, even when that means standing against those who wear the same uniform, especially when it means that. She'd nodded then, young, newly minted, full of determination and hunger. Now 12 years later, lying in a barracks bunk, while predators circled closer, she understood those words differently. Understood that the hardest fights weren't always overseas, that the most important battles sometimes happened in corridors where cameras didn't reach. That real courage wasn't charging enemy positions, It was standing alone against institutional rot and saying no more, even when saying it meant risking everything. Tomorrow she'd say it, not with words, with action. With 3 seconds of controlled violence that would accomplish what 18 months of complaints and documentation and peer counseling sessions hadn't. Tomorrow change arrived, wearing the face of a woman they'd underestimated, carrying the lessons of a man who'd spent 41 years learning how to identify predators and eliminate them. Tomorrow the silence ended, and the reckoning began. Day 4 came like judgment, the heat pressing down even before sunrise, sky the color of old bruises, air thick enough to taste, the kind of morning that felt like something was about to break. Alara woke at 0500, earlier than necessary, but she needed time. Time to center herself, to run through scenarios one final time, to ensure every variable was accounted for and every response was calibrated. She dressed slowly, standard fatigues, boots laced tight, hair secured, everything regulation, everything squared away. Because when this was over, when MPs arrived and reports were filed and Admiral asked questions, there couldn't be any detail that suggested anything except professional conduct right up until the moment self-defense became necessary. Morning formation was tense, the heat already oppressive, tempers short, discipline fraying at the edges. Perfect conditions. Cade Mercer and Thorne positioned themselves near Alara during PT, closer than yesterday, almost crowding, the circle tightening, predators moving from assessment to action. During the cool-down stretch, Thorne moved next to her, close enough that his shoulder touched hers. "You going to the equipment bay later?" The question was casual, too casual. "Probably," Alara said. Neutral, unremarkable. "Need to check some inventory. We'll be there around 1400, doing some gear maintenance." Not an offer, an announcement, territory being claimed. Alara nodded, said nothing more. But inside, the tactical clock started running. 1400 hours. Equipment bay. Eastern quarter. Exactly as projected. Everything was in position. Now she just had to wait. The morning dragged. Training exercises. Drills. The routine that had become familiar over 4 days. But underneath the routine tension building. The sense of something imminent. At 1330 hours, Alara walked to the equipment bay. Earlier than she'd indicated, deliberate choice. Let them find her. Let them think this was opportunity rather than trap. She moved through the main storage area, past rows of gear, combat packs, helmets, body armor, the implements of military function arranged in precise order. She moved toward the eastern quarter, the narrow passage between equipment racks where visibility was limited and cameras couldn't reach. The blind spot, the killing floor. The place where Bryn Caldwell had been cornered and broken and eventually driven out of service. Not today. Today that pattern ended. Alara positioned herself halfway down the corridor, examining a rack of training equipment, back partially turned, vulnerable, available, perfect prey. She heard them before she saw them. Boots on concrete, 3 sets, moving with coordinated purpose, not rushing, just converging. Predators who'd done this before, who knew the timing, who understood how to isolate targets. They entered the corridor, spread out, blocking exits. Cade in front, Mercer to the left, Thorne behind, triangle formation. Tactical positioning that would have been impressive if it wasn't being used for harassment. "Didn't expect to see you here," Cade said. "False surprise. Thought you'd be at afternoon drills." "Inventory check," Alara said. Kept her voice neutral. Didn't turn fully. Didn't acknowledge the positioning. "We can help with that," Mercer said, moving closer. Teamwork, right, integration. They were escalating faster than previous days, confidence building, certainty settling. They'd decided. This was the moment. This was where they'd push beyond harassment into assault, where they'd teach her that silence meant submission and isolation meant vulnerability, and female meant target. They were about to learn differently. "I'm fine," Alara said, still neutral, still calm. "Almost done." "Don't think you are," Thorne said. He'd moved behind her. Close. Too close. "Think you need some correction, form adjustment. You've been doing some things wrong out there." His hand reached for her shoulder. Not gentle, claiming, ownership. Alara stepped away. Smooth motion, not panicked, just creating distance. I don't need adjustment. Yeah, you do, Cade said. He moved closer, the triangle tightening. See, we've been watching you. 4 days. You're sloppy, weak, and that's dangerous. Puts everyone at risk when you can't maintain standards. My standards are fine. No, Mercer said, moving into her space. They're not, and we're going to show you why. His hand shot out, grabbed her uniform shirt at the collar. Not violent yet, but possessive, controlling. The physical line crossed. Let go, Alara said. Her voice remained calm, but something had shifted in her tone. Warning delivered. Mercer smiled. Or what? Thorne produced a training knife. Rubberized blade, non-lethal. But the message was clear. This was demonstration, humiliation. The same pattern that had worked on Bryn Caldwell and 3 other women before her. Here's what's going to happen, Cade said. His voice carried absolute certainty, the confidence of a predator who'd never been stopped. We're going to teach you about standards, about what happens when you don't meet them, about knowing your place. Thorne stepped closer, the knife in his hand, not threatening with it yet, just holding it, showing it. Psychological pressure before physical assault. Your shirt's too tight, Thorne said. Doesn't meet regulation. Let's fix that. The knife moved, slow, deliberate, pressed against the fabric of her uniform shirt. Not cutting yet, just touching, just demonstrating control. Step back, Alara said, still calm, still controlled. Final warning. Or what? Cade asked. Mocking. You going to report us? Good luck with that. We know how this works. No witnesses, no cameras. Just your word against ours. And we're good Marines. You're just another integration officer who couldn't handle the pressure. The knife bit. Fabric parted. A clean slice from collarbone downward. Not deep, not wounding, just cutting, exposing, humiliating. They were smiling. All 3. Confident, certain. Predators who'd learned that isolation plus intimidation plus institutional protection equaled immunity. They'd learned wrong. The knife moved for a second cut. Thorne's hand steady, his face showing satisfaction. The pleasure of dominance, of power without consequence. That's when Alara moved, and everything changed. Her right hand snapped upward, seized Thorne's wrist at the exact point where nerve cluster met bone. Fingers positioned with surgical precision. Pressure applied not with strength, but with anatomical knowledge. The kind of technique that turned joints into leverage points and leverage points into weapons. Thorne's fingers spasmed, involuntary nerve response. The knife clattered to concrete. Before it finished bouncing, Alara's left hand drove upward. Palm striked to chin, not wild, not emotional, calculated, 45-degree angle. Force transmitted through jaw into equilibrium center. Thorne's head snapped back. His body followed. Balance disrupted. Control severed. Alara's hip rotated. Classic judo throw. Using his weight and momentum, redirecting rather than opposing. Thorne hit the ground. Hard, wind expelled, confusion replacing confidence. 2.1 seconds elapsed. Mercer charged, his size, his weapon. 240 pounds of mass aimed at overwhelming. He reached for her, grabbed her uniform. Started to lift. Alara went with the motion. Didn't resist. Used his momentum. Her arms snaked around his neck, not choking, controlling. Rear naked choke position, but modified. One hand on his wrist, the other driving his elbow toward hyperextension. Shoulder joint stressed. Ligaments stretched. The pop was audible. Mercer screamed, high-pitched, pain overriding aggression. Alara controlled his descent, put him on the mats. Face down, arm locked. Not broken, just comprehensively controlled. She applied pressure, enough to hurt, enough to teach, not enough to cause permanent damage. 4.7 seconds total. Cade moved, not toward Alara, toward the knife. Tactical thinking. Arm his opponent, then engage. Smart, but too slow, because Alara's boot was already moving. Intercepted his hand 6 inches from the blade. pinned it to concrete. Exact pressure. No brakes. Just pain. Just lesson. Cade tried to rise. Alara's other foot swept his base. Knee to ground, then full mount. Forearm across throat. Not crushing, controlling. His options eliminated. His choices removed. His certainty shattered. Done, Alara asked, her breathing steady, not even elevated, as if this was training exercise rather than combat, as if dismantling 3 opponents in under 5 seconds was routine, which for her it was. Cade's eyes were wide, confusion warring with comprehension. His mouth worked. No words came. I asked if you're done, Alara repeated, still calm, still controlled, still absolutely certain. Yeah, Cade gasped. Yeah, we're done. Good. Alara stood. Smooth motion, no hesitation. She stepped back, created distance. Let them breathe but didn't let them recover. That's when footsteps echoed. Multiple sets, moving fast. MPs responding to alert. Gunnery Sergeant Darraway in the lead. 2 corporals behind him. Admiral Ashford 30 seconds behind them. They rounded the corner, saw 3 Marines on the ground. One gasping, one cradling his shoulder. One staring at the ceiling like he'd seen God and learned God didn't like him. And one woman standing in the middle. Torn shirt held together with one hand. Breathing steady, expression neutral. Darraway's hand moved toward his sidearm. Reflex, then stopped. Because something in the scene didn't match expectations. The woman wasn't panicked, wasn't scared, wasn't victim. She was calm, collected, and standing like someone who'd just completed a training exercise rather than survived assault. Commander, Darraway said, then stopped. Commander Turn. Alara reached into her pocket, produced the black ID wallet, dented it without word. Let the credentials speak. Darraway opened it. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, something approaching awe. Commander Alara Vance, he read aloud, Naval Special Warfare, NSWC SEAL Team Evaluation Officer, Tier 1 clearance, SOCOM attached. The corridor went silent. Even Mercer's gasping stopped. Because those words, Tier 1 SOCOM SEAL, they carried weight. They meant something. They meant the woman they'd cornered wasn't prey. She was predator, had always been predator, had just been patient enough to let them commit before demonstrating exactly what she was. Admiral Ashford arrived, took in the scene, his face hardened. Sergeant, secure these 3. Medical isolation, no communication. I want statements from everyone in this facility who had contact with them over the past 4 days. Yes, sir. And Commander Vance. Ashford's voice carried respect now. Recognition. Are you injured? No, sir. Do you require medical attention? No, sir. Do you wish to file charges? Alara looked down at Cade, at Mercer, at Thorne. 3 predators who'd learned that institutional protection wasn't absolute, that eventually accountability arrived. I don't file charges, Admiral. I make recommendations. And I recommend you call Colonel Whitmore at the Pentagon immediately. Because what happened here today isn't an isolated incident. It's the visible part of systemic failure. And SOCOM needs full debrief. Ashford nodded. Sergeant, get these 3 out of here. Commander with me. As MPs moved to secure the 3 Marines, Cade looked up at Alara, his face carrying questions he couldn't articulate. How? Why? What just happened? Alara met his eyes, held them. When she spoke, her voice carried something beyond calm, carried certainty, authority, the weight of 12 years proving herself and 41 years of institutional wisdom passed down from a man who'd taught her that real warriors protected rather than prayed. You made 3 mistakes, she said quietly. First, you assumed silence meant weakness. Second, you assumed isolation meant vulnerability. Third, you assumed that cutting a woman's uniform meant you were in control. You were wrong on all 3 counts. And now you'll have the rest of your very short military career to think about why. She turned, walked toward the exit, left them on the ground with MPs in comprehension and the slow realization that everything they believed about power and protection and immunity had been illusion. That real operators didn't announce themselves. They just operated. And when predators emerged, real operators eliminated them. Not with rage, not with emotion, with precision, skill. Justice delivered so efficiently it looked effortless. Behind her, the corridor emptied. MPs hauling away 3 careers that had just ended. Ashford already on his phone with Stone, Darroway securing the scene, evidence being documented, patterns being revealed. The machinery of institutional accountability finally engaging because one operator had been patient enough to let predators commit before demonstrating exactly what Tier 1 meant. Alara walked into California heat, torn shirt, steady breathing, mission complete. Phase 1 finished. Now came Phase 2, the investigation, the documentation. The systemic reform that would ensure Bryn Caldwell's story didn't repeat. She reached for her sat phone. Encrypted line. Stone answered on first ring. "It's done," she said simply. "Status, 3 subjects secured, 0 injuries except pride. Evidence documented, admirals engaged, full investigation. Timeline accelerated but clean." Silence. Then Stone's voice, carrying something she rarely heard from him. "Pride. That's my student. Well done, Commander. Well done." The call ended. Alara stood in desert sun, felt heat pressing down, felt torn fabric against her skin, felt satisfaction of justice delivered and mission accomplished and predators stopped. But mostly she felt certainty that this was what she'd trained for, what 12 years had built toward, what Stone's 41 years of wisdom had prepared her to execute. Real warriors protected, and today she'd protected 7 victims and prevented dozens more. Had proven that institutional rot, when properly confronted, wasn't invincible, that predators, when properly engaged, were just cowards, and that silence, when deployed strategically, was the most devastating weapon of all. Phase 1 complete, Phase 2 beginning, and somewhere in Pentagon basement office, Colonel Garrett Whitmore smiled, because his student had just reminded the entire military establishment what real operators looked like. They looked like justice. And justice had just arrived in California desert, 3 seconds at a time. But as Alara walked back toward the admin building, a corporal intercepted her. Young, nervous, holding a manila envelope with no return address. "Commander, this arrived for you. Courier dropped it at the gate 20 minutes ago. Wouldn't say who sent it." Alara took the envelope, felt the weight, something substantial inside. She opened it carefully, found a USB drive, a handwritten note on plain paper. "I couldn't fight when it happened, but I kept everything. Photos, audio recordings, names of 4 other women at different bases where he served. This is what you need to finish it. Make sure he never does this again. BC. Bryn Caldwell, Staff Sergeant, 28 years old, medical discharge." The woman who'd been broken 18 months ago but had never stopped documenting, had never stopped believing that someday someone would listen. Alara looked at the USB drive, at the note, at the evidence that would transform this from isolated incident to systematic pattern spanning 4 bases in 27 years. Stone answered on first ring. "We have more," Alara said simply. "Caldwell kept everything. 4 bases, multiple victims, audio recordings of Hargrave coaching the perpetrators. This just became a federal case." Silence. Then Stone's voice thick with something that might have been vindication or grief or both. "Then we finish it. All of it. No more victims. No more dismissed complaints. We burn this system down and rebuild it right." "Copy that," Alara said. And for the first time in 4 days, she smiled. Because Bryn Caldwell hadn't been broken. She'd been waiting, documenting, building the case that would ensure her story and the stories of women like her would finally matter. That was real strength, not the ability to fight back in the moment. The refusal to let being silenced mean being erased. The debrief room was sterile. White walls, metal table, 2 chairs, single fluorescent light that flickered every 17 seconds like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. This was where truth got extracted, where stories got tested against evidence, where the difference between justified action and excessive force got decided by men who'd never been cornered in corridors by predators wearing the same uniform. But Commander Alara Vance wasn't worried, because she documented everything. Recorded timestamps, cataloged incidents, built a case so airtight that even institutional inertia couldn't dismiss it. And because sitting across from her wasn't some skeptical investigator looking for reasons to doubt, it was Admiral Corbin Ashford, and standing behind him, having arrived 90 minutes after the incident, was Colonel Garrett Whitmore. Stone looked older in this light, the fluorescent harshness revealing lines that Pentagon shadows had hidden. 67 years etched into features that had seen Grenada tunnels and Desert Storm sand and Somalia streets in Fallujah chaos. But his eyes were sharp, focused. And when he looked at Alara, she saw something that mattered more than approval. She saw recognition. Operator to operator. Mission accomplished. "Let's start from the beginning," Ashford said. His voice carried weight, command authority, but also something more, embarrassment, because this had happened on his base, under his watch. And he'd missed it until SOCOM sent someone to expose it. Ilara walked him through it. 4 days, escalating harassment, verbal to physical, testing to touching. The pattern documented in her encrypted recorder, the timeline matching exactly what Stone's files had predicted. 3 predators, 1 method, institutional protection that had worked 6 times before. Until it met someone who'd trained for 12 years to dismantle exactly this kind of threat. "The knife," Ashford said. "Private Thorne cut your uniform." "Yes, sir. Deliberate action, intended to humiliate rather than wound. Classic dominance display, designed to demonstrate control and establish hierarchy." "And your response?" 3 techniques: nerve strike to force weapon release, palm strike to disrupt equilibrium, hip throw to neutralize threat, then control positions on the other 2 subjects. Total engagement time 4.7 seconds. No permanent injuries. Minimum force necessary to end the assault and establish control. Ashford looked at Stone. "You trained her." "I taught her mechanics," Stone said. "She developed the precision herself. That's what 12 years of SEAL operations does, turns training into instinct." "The question I have to ask, Commander." Ashford's voice careful now. "Legal territory. Was this a setup? Did you engineer this situation?" Alara met his eyes. "I positioned myself as available target in location where previous assaults had occurred. I documented harassment over 4 days. I allowed them to commit to assault before intervening. If that's engineering, sir, then yes. I engineered a situation where predators revealed themselves and I could stop them with sufficient evidence that their pattern couldn't be denied or dismissed. Some would call that entrapment. Some would be wrong. Entrapment is inducing someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. I didn't induce anything. I simply provided opportunity for men who'd already demonstrated predatory behavior to commit assault on someone they believed was vulnerable. The fact that I wasn't actually vulnerable doesn't make their intent less criminal." Stone spoke. "Admiral Commander Vance didn't create this problem. She exposed it. The question isn't whether her methods were aggressive. The question is why SOCOM had to send a Tier 1 operator to identify a pattern your own command structure should have caught 18 months ago." Ashford's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Point taken. What do you need from me?" Alara produced a tablet, pulled up files. Access to every complaint filed in the last 24 months. Every transfer request from female personnel. Every medical discharge coded for stress or adaptation issues. And I need to interview Staff Sergeant Bryn Caldwell. Caldwell transferred out 16 months ago. I know, I need to interview her anyway, because her pattern matches. And if we're building a case that demonstrates systemic failure rather than isolated incident, we need her testimony. What about the 3 subjects of Mertrice? Medical isolation until SOCOM investigation team arrives. No communication with each other or with anyone else on base, and I want their service records. Complete, not just the official files. I want counseling notes, peer reviews, any informal complaints that never made it to formal documentation. Ashford looked at Stone. "She always this thorough." "She's Tier 1 Corbin. Thorough is the minimum standard. What she's really asking for is the evidence that proves Major Silas Hargrave has been systematically protecting these men. Because that's the real target here. Not 3 predators. The institutional rot that enabled them." The Admiral's face went carefully neutral. "That's a serious accusation." It's a documented fact, Alara said. She pulled up more files. 7 formal complaints, 18 months, all routed through Hargrave as XO, all resolved through peer counseling or voluntary withdrawal. 0 formal investigations, 0 disciplinary actions. Either Hargrave is spectacularly incompetent at identifying predatory behavior, or he's actively protecting it. I'm betting on the latter. Why would he do that? Stone answered. Because 27 years ago, Silas Hargrave was accused of similar behavior at Quantico. The case was dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Victim transferred out. And Hargrave learned a valuable lesson, that the system protects people who maintain plausible deniability. So he's been recreating that protection for others, not because he's evil, because he genuinely believes he's defending military standards against what he sees as erosion. How do you know this? Because I was the investigating officer in 1996. I recommended dishonorable discharge. Command overruled me. Hargrave stayed in service, and I've regretted that decision for 27 years. So when I started seeing patterns at this facility that matched his old methods, I requested SOCOM intervention, because this time he doesn't get protected. This time accountability happens. Ashford sat back, processing. The room's silent except for the fluorescent light flickering its 17-second rhythm. Finally he spoke. What do you need? Everything, Alara said. Files, access, authority to interview anyone on this base. And I need Major Hargrave kept away from the investigation. He's a subject, not a colleague. He's going to push back. He has friends in Pentagon. Had friends, Stone corrected. I spent the last week making sure those friendships were properly contextualized with information about ongoing SOCOM investigation. He's isolated now, just doesn't know it yet. Ashford nodded slowly. You've been planning this for months. 3 months, Stone confirmed, since I identified the pattern. Since I realized that Bryn Caldwell's forced discharge matched 3 others at facilities where Hargrave had served. Since I understood that he wasn't just protecting predators here, he'd been doing it for years, moving from base to base, building the same system, and nobody stopped him because nobody connected the patterns. Until you did. Until I did. And then I called the one person I knew could infiltrate, document, and dismantle it. Because that's what Tier 1 operators do. They solve problems command structure can't or won't address. Ilara stood. Admiral, with respect, we're burning time. I need those files, I need interview access, and I need SOCOM investigation team here within 48 hours. Because Hargrave's going to realize what's happening soon. And when he does, he'll start damage control. Moving files, coaching witnesses, building his defense. We need to move faster than he can react. Ashford stood too. You'll have everything within 2 hours. I'll make the calls. One more thing, Ilara said. I need Private Ainsley Vaughn brought in. She's a victim. She filed informal complaint 6 months ago. Hargrave dismissed it. She needs to know she was right, that she wasn't weak or oversensitive or any of the other things she was probably told. She was victimized. And now we're going to make it right. I'll have her report to you. Not report, request. I want her to come voluntarily, to understand that this is her choice, because that's what these men took from her and 6 others. Choice, agency, the right to be heard and believed. We're going to give that back. Ashford left. The door closed. Alara and Stone alone in the fluorescent flicker. You did well, Stone said quietly. Better than I projected. I had good training. You had adequate training. What you did out there, that was 12 years of operational experience, meeting 41 years of institutional knowledge. That was the lesson I tried to teach actually being implemented. Patience as weapon, silence as strategy, and justice delivered so precisely that nobody can question whether it was deserved. Alara sat back down, suddenly tired, adrenaline fading, the reality of what she'd done settling in. Not doubt, just wait, because those 3 men's careers were over. Their futures eliminated. And while they deserved it, while justice demanded it, ending someone's life, even deservedly, carried weight. Stone seemed to read her thoughts. You're wondering if you were too harsh. No, I'm wondering how they became that. How 3 Marines who took oaths and earned rank and were trusted with responsibility turned into predators. Same way Hargrave did. They learned that institutional protection plus plausible deniability equals immunity. They learned that women who complained weren't believed, that paperwork could be lost, that peer counseling meant intimidation. And they learned that nobody with real authority cared enough to stop them. So they kept hunting, because hunting worked. Until today, until they cornered someone who'd spent 12 years learning how to end hunts permanently. Caldwell could have been me, Alara said quietly. 19 years old, different base, different predator, same pattern. I filed complaint, got told I was oversensitive, that I'd misunderstood, that maybe military service wasn't for me, and I had choice, quit or endure. I chose endure, but I shouldn't have had to make that choice. Nobody should. No, they shouldn't. That's why we're here. To make sure Caldwell's story doesn't repeat. To make sure that 19-year-old who gets cornered and intimidated has system that protects her instead of dismissing her. To make sure that predators don't get 41 years to operate like Hargrave did. They get caught. They get stopped. They get eliminated from service. Not because we're vindictive, because we're protective of standards, of honor, of the people who deserve better than institutional betrayal. Alara nodded. When does SOCOM team arrive? Tomorrow. General Patricia Hendricks is leading it personally. She was my student too. 28 years ago. Desert Storm. She was lieutenant then. Now she's 3-star and head of SOCOM oversight for special warfare programs. When I briefed her on this situation, she cleared her schedule because she remembers what it's like being woman in military when predators operated with impunity. And she's spent 28 years making sure that system changes. Will Hargrave cooperate? No, he'll fight. He'll claim selective prosecution. He'll argue that he was protecting Marines who were maintaining standards against erosion. He'll wrap himself in tradition and honor and 41 years of service. And none of it will matter because we have documentation, we have pattern, we have victims willing to testify, and we have you. Tier 1 operator who documented everything, acted with precision, and can't be dismissed as oversensitive or mistaken. You're the case they can't argue against. The door opened. A corporal entered. Commander Vance Private Vaughn is here. She's asking if you have time to speak with her. Alara stood. Send her in. The corporal left. Moments later, Ainsley Vaughn entered, 22 years old. Blonde hair still regulation tight, but her eyes carried something different now. Not fear, uncertainty. The look of someone who'd been told she was wrong so many times she'd started believing it, but who'd just seen 3 predators hauled away by MPs, who'd just learned that maybe possibly she'd been right all along. Ma'am, Ainsley said, I mean, people are saying she stopped, started again. Are you really a SEAL? I am. And those 3, Cade and Mercer and Thorne, they assaulted me. Same pattern they used on you 6 months ago. I documented it, then I stopped it, and now they're in custody pending SOCOM investigation. Ainsley's eyes went wet, not crying, just relief so overwhelming it had to go somewhere. I tried to report it, what Cade did. I filed complaint with Major Hargrave. He said I was mistaken, that Cade was just doing his job, that I needed to be less sensitive if I wanted to succeed in military environment. You weren't mistaken. You weren't oversensitive. You were victimized. And the man who dismissed you is being investigated for systematic protection of predators. Because you were right, Ainsley. You were right and he was wrong. And you're going to get to tell your story to people who will believe you. What if they don't? What if they will? Because this time we have more than your word. We have pattern, we have documentation, we have multiple victims, and we have evidence that proves Hargrave's been doing this for 27 years. Your testimony is an isolated complaint that can be dismissed. It's part of a comprehensive case that proves institutional failure. Ainsley sat down, hands shaking slightly. Why didn't anyone believe me before? Stone spoke from his position near the wall. Because the system was designed to protect institution rather than individuals. Because complaints were seen as problems to be managed rather than injustices to be corrected. Because men like Hargrave learned that if they could dismiss enough victims, eventually victims stopped coming forward. And silence meant they could keep operating. That's what we're changing, starting here, starting now. I want to testify, Ainsley said, voice stronger now. Whatever you need. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. It will happen again, Alara said honestly, because predators exist. But what we can change is the response, how quickly they're identified, how thoroughly they're stopped, how completely they're eliminated from positions where they can victimize others. You testifying helps create that change. You speaking truth helps ensure next victim gets believed instead of dismissed. When tomorrow SOCOM team arrives, you'll give formal statement. It'll be recorded. It'll be part of official investigation. And when this is over, when Hargrave and those three are discharged and prosecuted, your story will be part of the record that justified it. You'll be part of making military better, safer, more just. Ainsley nodded, wiped her eyes. Thank you, ma'am, for believing me, for everything. Thank me by staying in service, by not letting what happened to you define your career, by proving that victims can become survivors and survivors can become leaders. That's the real change, not just stopping predators, empowering the people they targeted to become stronger than they were before. Ainsley stood, saluted, not required for officer and fatigues without rank visible, but meaningful. Gesture of respect earned rather than commanded. Alara returned it, sharp, precise. Acknowledgement between operators who'd both survived what shouldn't have happened and were now ensuring it wouldn't happen again. When Ainsley left, Alara sat back down, exhaustion settling deeper. Stone moved to the chair across from her. You're giving her what you needed, he said. 19 years old, filing complaint, getting dismissed. You needed someone to believe you, to tell you that you were right and they were wrong, and you didn't get it, so now you're giving it to her. Is that wrong? It's human, and it's necessary, because institutional change doesn't happen through policy alone. It happens when people who are hurt decide to prevent others from being hurt the same way. You're building that, creating culture where victims become advocates, where silence becomes testimony, where powerlessness becomes agency. Will it work? It is already working, because tomorrow when General Hendricks arrives, she's bringing new protocols, mandatory external oversight for harassment complaints, anonymous reporting systems, zero-tolerance enforcement. And it's happening because you proved it was necessary, because you documented systematic failure so thoroughly that even institutional inertia can't dismiss it. That's Tier 1 impact, not just mission success, structural change. The next 36 hours blurred together. Interviews, documentation, file reviews, evidence compilation. Alara moved through it with methodical precision. Each victim's story documented, each incident cataloged, each piece of evidence cross-referenced and verified. Staff Sergeant Bryn Caldwell agreed to video testimony from her current posting. 28 years old, civilian clothes now, medical discharge official. But her story matched the pattern perfectly. Harassment, escalation, formal complaint. Hargrave's dismissal, pressure to withdraw, eventually choosing career over justice because justice wasn't available. I thought I was weak, Caldwell said through the video connection. Thought I couldn't handle military culture, that I was the problem, and I carried that shame for 16 months, until today, until I learned that it wasn't me, it was them, and that someone finally stopped them. You weren't weak, Alara said. You were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and betrayed by institutional structure that should have protected you. But your story matters now, because it proves this wasn't isolated. It was systematic, and your testimony helps ensure justice finally happens. Caldwell nodded. Whatever you need, I'm ready. By the time General Patricia Hendricks arrived, 58 years old, 3 stars face that had seen Desert Storm in Afghanistan and 28 years of fighting institutional battles that didn't involve bullets, the case was complete. 7 victims, 18 months of documented harassment, pattern across 4 bases where Hargrave had served, evidence of systematic protection and institutional failure. The general reviewed everything in silence, 4 hours in the same debrief room where this had started. When she finally spoke, her voice carried weight that went beyond rank. This is worse than we projected. Yes, ma'am, Alara said. Hargrave's been operating like this since 1996, 27 years. How many victims? Documentation suggests minimum 15 across 4 bases. Actual number probably triple that. Most never reported. Those who did were dismissed. And Whitmore recommended discharge in 96. Yes, ma'am, command overruled. Political considerations. Hargrave had connections, and victim was believed to be unreliable witness. Hendricks looked at Stone. That's why you've been building this case for 3 months. Personal stake. Professional stake, Stone corrected. I failed in 96. Let politics override justice. Let Predator continue operating because removing him was inconvenient. 27 years later, I'm not failing again. You won't have to. We have enough here to proceed with full court-martial. Hargrave, Cade, Mercer, Thorne, all 4 charges ranging from assault to systematic abuse of authority to obstruction of justice. They're done. Timeline, Alara asked. Formal charges within 48 hours. Arrest and confinement within 72. Court-martial proceedings begin within 30 days. This moves fast. No delays, no political interference. And when it's over, we implement new protocols base-wide, then service-wide. This facility becomes pilot program for harassment prevention and response. What failed here gets fixed, and what gets fixed here gets implemented everywhere. What about the victims? Full support, counseling, career assistance. Those who transferred out get opportunity to return if they choose. Those who were medically discharged get records reviewed and honorable status restored where appropriate. We don't just punish perpetrators, we restore victims. That's the complete justice. Alara felt something unknot in her chest. Tension she'd carried for 4 days, longer, 12 years, since she was 19 and filed complaint and learned that truth didn't always matter more than convenience. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me, Commander. You built this, you documented, you risked, you executed. All I'm doing is ensuring institutional machinery does what it should have done 18 months ago. 27 years ago, every time someone brave enough to speak truth got dismissed instead of heard. That's changing, starting now. The general stood. Colonel Whitmore, your presence is required at Pentagon. Debrief for senior staff. This case is going to generate attention. Political, media, congressional. We need unified message. Commander Vance, you're staying here. 3 weeks minimum. You'll oversee implementation of new protocols. Train personnel. Ensure cultural change that actually happens rather than just being documented in policy. This is Tier 1 assignment. Structural intervention. Understood, ma'am. Hendricks left. Stone prepared to follow. But at the door he stopped. Turned back to Alara. 41 years, he said quietly. 7 countries, dozens of operations, hundreds of personnel trained, thousands of decisions. And this right here, right now, this might be the thing I'm most proud of. Not because I did it, because I trained someone who could. Because I passed on knowledge and it got used properly. For protection rather than predation. For justice rather than convenience. That's legacy. That's what matters. You're not done yet, Alara said. Still have retirement ceremony in 6 weeks. Formality. This was the real ending. This was the mission that mattered. And you executed it perfectly. Better than I could have. Because you understood something I took 41 years to learn. That real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting them. And you protected 7 women who deserve better than they got. That's what operators do. That's what Tier 1 means. He nodded once, sharp, final, then left. Alara sat alone in the debrief room, fluorescent light still flickering its 17-second rhythm. She thought about Bryn Caldwell, about Ainsley Vaughn, about 6 other women whose stories were now part of official record instead of dismissed complaints, about Cade Mercer and Thorne in confinement, wondering how 3 men ended up destroying their careers in under 5 seconds, about Hargrave, who'd spent 27 years believing protection was permanent learning that accountability eventually arrived. She thought about being 19, filing complaint, being dismissed, choosing endurance over justice because justice wasn't available. And she thought about how different that might have been if anyone had believed her, had investigated, had stopped Predator before he could find more victims. That was changing now. Because of this. Because she documented and executed and demonstrated that institutional failure could be corrected if someone was willing to risk enough to expose it. Her sat phone buzzed. Encrypted message. From Stone. General Hendricks sending Kabar knife to you, Desert Storm era, her personal blade. Said real warriors pass on tools to those who will use them properly. You've earned it. Carry it well. Alara smiled, thought about Grenada tunnels and Desert Storm sand and 41 years of wisdom being distilled into single blade, into symbol of legacy, into understanding that real strength protected rather than preyed, that real operators eliminated threats rather than creating them, that real justice was precise and surgical and absolutely certain. 3 weeks later, cultural change was visible. Female Marines walking taller, speaking louder, taking space rather than shrinking from it. Male Marines adjusting, some resisting, most adapting, few becoming actual allies rather than passive observers. Ainsley Vaughn re-enlisted, applied for combat training, passed initial qualifications, showed promise not just as Marine but as leader, because she'd learned something fundamental, that being victimized didn't mean being defeated, that speaking truth mattered even when initially dismissed, that systems could change if enough people refused to accept institutional failure. The court-martials proceeded. Cade Mercer and Thorne received dishonorable discharges, prison sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years, permanent loss of benefits, lifetime prohibition from federal employment, not just punishment, elimination, ensuring they could never wear uniform or claim authority again. Hargrave fought harder, claimed selective prosecution, argued he'd been defending military standards, wrapped himself in 41 years of service in tradition and honor. None of it mattered. 7 victims testified. Documentation was comprehensive. Pattern was undeniable. And when verdict came, dishonorable discharge, 15 years federal prison, total forfeiture of pension and benefits. Hargrave's face showed something Alara recognized. Not just shock, comprehension. The slow realization that protection hadn't been permanent, that institutional immunity had been illusion, that accountability, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. After the verdict, Alara stood outside the courtroom, California sun beating down, heat pressing, but somehow feeling cleaner than before, as if justice had cauterized something infected, burned away rot, left space for healing. Her phone rang. Stone. Verdict came through, she said. I know, Hendricks called me. 15 years. He'll be 73 when released, if he survives that long. He created this, spent 27 years building system that protected predators. This is just accountability arriving. Agreed, how are you? Tired, ready to be done here. Not yet, still have 2 weeks, cultural implementation. Making sure change is embedded, not just documented. That's the mission, see it through. Copy that. Silence, then. Alara, you did something most operators never manage. You changed structure. Didn't just complete mission. Reshaped environment that created mission necessity. That's rare, that's tier 1 impact. And I want you to remember it, because careers are long, and you'll face harder fights. But you'll remember that institutional failure, when properly confronted, isn't invincible. That systems can change. That justice delivered precisely reshapes culture. Remember that. I will. Good. My retirement ceremony is in 3 weeks. You're invited. Front row. Because you're the proof that 41 years wasn't wasted. That lessons passed down get used properly. That legacy isn't about what you accomplished. It's about who carries your lessons forward. The ceremony came fast. Naval Yard, formal dress, Admiral Ashford presiding, General Hendricks present, 100 personnel assembled. Stone in service dress blues. 67 years compressed into ribbons and medals and citations that couldn't capture what 41 years of service actually meant. The speeches were standard. Honorable service, dedication, sacrifice. But when Stone spoke, he went different direction. 41 years, he said. Grenada to Afghanistan. I've trained thousands, led hundreds, executed more operations than I can count. And people ask what I'm most proud of. They expect me to talk about combat, about missions, about citations. But the truth is simpler. I'm most proud of the people I trained who became better than I was, who took lessons and improved them, who used knowledge for protection rather than domination. That's legacy, not what you did, who you taught, and whether they carried lessons forward properly. He looked directly at Alara. Commander Vance represents everything I tried to teach. Patience, precision, justice delivered without waste. She took those lessons and executed mission I couldn't complete 27 years ago. She did what I failed to do, and that's not my failure redeemed. It's my success realized, because I trained someone who could finish what I couldn't. That's what matters. After ceremony private moment, Stone presented Alara with blade, K-bar knife, but not Desert Storm era. Grenada, 1985, his personal blade. The one he'd carried through tunnels and case in moments where precision meant survival. Hendricks sent you Desert Storm blade, he said. This is older, more worn, but more important, because this is the knife that taught me lessons I passed to you, about patience, about waiting for exact right moment, about striking with certainty. It saved my life 6 times in Grenada. Now it's yours. Use it well. Alara took the blade, felt weight, history, legacy compressed into steel and leather, and grip worn smooth by 41 years of service. I'll honor it. I know you will. That's why I'm giving it. Not because you need weapon, because you've earned symbol. Carry it. Remember what it represents. Real warriors protect. Real operators eliminate threats. Real justice is precise. And real legacy is passing knowledge to people who will use it properly. 6 months later, Alara training new female SEAL candidates at Coronado, using Stone's methods, patience, precision, control, teaching them that silence wasn't weakness, that restraint was weapon, that real strength protected rather than dominated. Ainsley Vaughn enrolled in program, full circle, victim becoming operator, powerlessness transformed to capability. She struggled, fell, got back up, kept pushing. And Alara saw in her the same determination she carried at 19. The same refusal to let being targeted become being defeated. During knife training, Alara demonstrated techniques, close quarters, precision striking, using minimum force for maximum effect. She carried Stone's Grenada blade, showed it to candidates. 41 years, she said, this blade survived Grenada tunnels carried by man who taught me everything I know about being operator. He gave it to me not because I needed weapon, because I'd earned legacy. Someday if you earn it, you'll carry something like this. Not the blade itself, the lessons it represents. That real warriors protect. That real strength is precise. That real justice is certain. Remember that? Her encrypted phone buzzed. Message from Stone, now officially retired, consulting for SOCOM, still teaching, still passing knowledge. Camp Pendleton's situation resolved. 3 accidents investigated, pattern identified. 2 officers discharged, protocols implemented. Your methods worked, cultural change spreading, legacy multiplying. Alara smiled, looked at candidates struggling through obstacle course, saw Ainsley leading pace, saw others following, saw future being built by people who'd learned that being targeted didn't mean being defeated, that systems could change, that justice properly delivered reshaped culture. She thought about Corridor, 4 days, knife-cutting shirt, 3 seconds of controlled violence that ended careers and began transformation, about Bryn Caldwell restored, about Ainsley Vaughn becoming operator, about 7 victims given justice, about institutional rot being exposed and eliminated, about 1 mission that proved Tier 1 operators didn't just complete assignments. They changed structures, reshaped environments, created conditions where predators got stopped and victims got heard, and justice actually happened. That was legacy, not citations, not medals, not ribbons. The people you trained, the systems you changed, the culture you reshaped. The justice you delivered so precisely that it became template for others to follow. Alara touched the Grenada blade on her belt, felt weight, history, 41 years compressed into steel, and she understood something fundamental. Stone hadn't given her weapon. He'd given her responsibility to carry lessons forward, to train others properly, to ensure that knowledge paid for in blood across Grenada tunnels and Desert Storm sand and Somalia streets and Fallujah firefights got used to protect rather than prey, to eliminate threats rather than create them, to deliver justice rather than dismiss it. That responsibility weighed more than blade, but she'd carry both. For Stone, for Caldwell, for Ainsley, for 7 victims and 15 more across 27 years, and all the others who'd been dismissed and silenced and told their truth didn't matter. Their truth mattered now. Because one operator had been patient enough to document it, precise enough to prove it, certain enough to execute justice, and committed enough to ensure the system that had failed them got reshaped into a system that protected them. That was Tier 1 impact. That was legacy. That was what happened when silence stopped being weakness and became weapon. When restraint stopped being passivity and became strategy. When justice stopped being abstract concept and became 3 seconds of controlled violence that ended predation and began transformation. Commander Ilara Vance stood watching her candidates, carrying Stone's blade, teaching his lessons, building his legacy. And somewhere in California desert, an old warrior smiled, because 41 years hadn't been wasted. Knowledge had been passed, lessons had been learned, and the person carrying them forward was doing it perfectly. One operator, one mission, one knife at a time. Justice delivered, culture changed, legacy secured. The silence had ended, the reckoning was complete, and the transformation was just beginning.